For decades, businesses have kind of treated climate and nature like two totally separate problems. Well, that's not going to fly anymore. We're about to dive into the new, integrated playbook for managing these risks. And honestly, this is becoming absolutely essential for financial stability and even for strategic survival. So, to kick things off, let's chew on this question for a second. How do you actually measure the risk of a physical thing, like a flood, against a policy thing, like a new carbon tax, right? One is tangible, you can see it, it's immediate. The other is economic, it's regulatory. This is the exact challenge that businesses and financial institutions are trying to get their heads around right now.
And to even begin to tackle that, we've got to be super clear on two key terms. First, you've got risk measurement. That's all about quantifying the impact, putting a dollar value on the potential damage. But then you have risk assessment. That's about understanding the nature of that impact, the why and the how behind the numbers. You absolutely need both to manage risk effectively.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll deconstruct what climate risk actually is. Then, we'll look at how the global rulebook for reporting all this stuff is changing. After that, we're going to zoom out beyond just climate to the growing frontier of nature risk. And finally, we'll tie it all together to see what this new integrated reality really means for business.
Okay, let's jump right into our first section, deconstructing climate risk. We're going to break it down into its two main flavors, physical risk and transition risk.
The difference here is simple, but it is so critical. Think of it like this. Physical risks are the direct hits from the climate. We're talking hurricanes, wildfires, sea level rise. But transition risks, those are the impacts from the world's reaction to climate change. Things like new carbon taxes, the big shift to electric vehicles, or customers suddenly demanding sustainable products. So one is nature, the other is the human response.
All right, let's dig a little deeper into physical risk. It's not just one big blob. It's really a function of three separate parts all working together. Let's break them down one by one.
First up, you have the hazard. This is the event itself. It's the flood, the heat wave, the drought. It's the physical thing that a changing climate throws at us, the thing that has the potential to cause harm. But a hazard isn't really a risk if there's nothing in its way, right? That brings us to exposure. Exposure is all about what's in the path of that hazard, your factories, your data centers, your supply chain routes, even your employees. And the final piece of the puzzle is vulnerability. This basically asks, how bad is the damage going to be? For example, a brand new, flood-proof building has pretty low vulnerability to a flood. But an older building right next to it, super high vulnerability. It all comes down to resilience. So you have hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. Those three together are what define physical risk. Okay, so we get the risks, but now how do companies actually report on them in a consistent way? In our second section, we're going to look at the global push to standardize all this, specifically how we're moving from the TCFD, that's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, to the new ISSB standards. This timeline shows a really clear, deliberate handover. Back in 2017, the TCFD laid the groundwork with its recommendations. Then, fast forward to 2023, and the new International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, drops its formal standards. With its mission accomplished, the TCFD basically disbanded, passing the torch to the IFRS Foundation to keep an eye on things from 2024 onward.
And here is the key thing to remember. The ISSB isn't starting from zero. These new standards are built directly on top of the four core pillars that the TCFD made famous: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. It's an evolution, not a revolution, which is definitely good news for any companies that were already using the TCFD framework.
But this evolution does bring some really critical changes. The ISSB zooms out from just climate to cover broader sustainability issues. And crucially, it moves us away from voluntary recommendations to global standards that are designed to be mandatory. But the really big one for a lot of companies? Scope 3 emissions. What used to be just encouraged is now a requirement. That means businesses have to report emissions from their entire value chain. That's huge. So, let's move on to our third section and see how this whole thing gets even bigger. We're going beyond just climate now, to explore what many are calling the nature frontier. This quote from our source material really nails it. Nature risk and climate risk, they're not the same thing, but they are deeply connected. Think about it. Climate change can speed up the degradation of nature, and at the same time, the loss of nature can make climate change even worse. It's a feedback loop. And this slide makes it so clear.
You see, climate change is only one of 5 major drivers of nature risk. We also have to think about changes in how we use land and sea, direct exploitation of resources, pollution, and invasive species. It's a way broader and more complex picture than just looking at climate by itself.
To find our way around this new frontier, we need to get our vocabulary straight. Nature risk is kind of the big umbrella term. Under that, you have biodiversity risk, which is about threats to the variety of life. Then there's ecosystem risk. That's the danger of systems that give us essential things, like clean water or pollination, collapsing. And of course, water risk, which is so critical it gets its own category.
So if the TCFD was the playbook for climate, what's the playbook for nature? Well, the answer is the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. It's a new initiative designed to give businesses and investors a clear framework for this really complex topic.
And here's the smart part. The TNFD was modeled directly on the TCFD. It uses the exact same 4-pillar structure: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. So for organizations, this feels familiar and consistent. But notice that small but really important change in wording, from risk management to risk and impact management. That reflects nature's dual focus.
But nature has some unique challenges. So the TNFD adds some crucial nature-specific disclosures. Because nature risk is so localized, it puts a big emphasis on location-based impacts. It calls for new metrics on things like ecosystem integrity and biodiversity, and it really stresses how important it is to engage with local and indigenous communities who are often the stewards of these natural resources.
So how do you actually put this into practice? Well, to make it practical, the TNFD recommends a 4-step process called the LEAP approach. First, you allocate your interface with nature. Then you evaluate your dependencies on it and your impacts to it. Third, you assess your risks and opportunities. And finally, you prepare to respond and report. It's a really clear, actionable framework for any organization to just get started.
Okay, let's pull all of this together in our final section. We're looking at a new integrated reality and what this convergence of climate and nature risk really means for businesses on the ground.
And if you're wondering if this is all just talk, take a look at this number: $1.7 billion. That's the funding that was committed at a recent COP summit, specifically for projects that tackle climate and biodiversity together. The financial world is already integrating these ideas, and you can see a massive amount of capital is starting to move. And all of this leads us to our final question. The lines between climate risk and nature risk, they're blurring. They're merging into a single complex challenge. The frameworks are now here, the financial incentives are growing. So the only question that's left is this: are businesses ready to step back and see the whole picture?